The Seattle Seahawks may have just tipped their hand ahead of one of the most important draft decisions in recent years, and it all starts with what Mike Macdonald has been saying behind the scenes and in front of the media, because when you really break down his words, a very clear direction begins to emerge for pick number 32. But the question is clear. Which position do we most need reinforcement in? Write your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to click the like button, because I'll keep you well informed here. There's no way around it. The biggest need on this roster right now is at the edge rusher position. And that reality didn't just appear overnight. It was shaped the moment Boy Mafe walked out the door in free agency. A move that might have surprised some fans at first, but when you look deeper, it becomes easier to understand why Seattle didn't pull the trigger on a deal worth around $20 million per year. Mafe was productive, he consistently won his pass rush reps, and his impact went beyond just sack numbers, but paying that kind of money to what was effectively your fourth edge rusher was never going to align with how this front office wants to build the roster. Now, the current group still has recognizable names. DeMarcus Lawrence is locked in and brings veteran presence. Uchenna Nwosu is still part of the rotation, and Derek Hall continues to develop. But here's where things start to get interesting, and honestly, a little concerning when you think long-term. Nwosu and Hall are both approaching the final years of their contracts, and Nwosu in particular is starting to creep into that age range where decline becomes a real conversation. As for DeMarcus Lawrence, while he's under contract, there are already whispers about retirement, and those kinds of rumors don't just disappear once they start circulating. They tend to grow louder. So when you step back and look at the full picture, there's a very real scenario where within the next couple of seasons, this entire edge group could look completely different. That's exactly why the number 32 pick becomes so critical. This isn't just about adding depth. It's about securing the future of one of the most important positions in Mike Macdonald's defense. And if you listen closely to Macdonald's comments, especially when he talked about what made Boy Mafe valuable, it feels like he's practically describing the type of player Seattle is targeting in this draft. He emphasized quick wins off the edge, the ability to disrupt the quarterback early in a play, and how even if that pressure doesn't result in a sack, it creates opportunities for others. That's not just generic coach speak. That's a blueprint. Mafe's advanced metrics back that up in a big way. A 19% pass rush win rate and an 11.4% pressure rate put him among some of the more effective disruptors in the league, even if the sack totals didn't always reflect it. And right now, that specific skill set is missing from Seattle's defensive front. They have solid, well-rounded players, but not necessarily that explosive, twitchy edge rusher who can consistently win immediately off the snap. That brings us directly to one of the most intriguing names connected to Seattle. R. Mason Thomas, out of Oklahoma. He's the kind of player that fits almost perfectly into the mold Macdonald was describing. His game is built on speed, burst, and athleticism. He's not the biggest or strongest edge rusher in this class, and yes, there are legitimate concerns about his ability to hold up against the run, but when it comes to getting after the quarterback, he brings exactly what this defense is currently lacking. And here's something that makes this connection even more real. This isn't just speculation. Seattle already brought him in for a top 30 visit, which tells you there's genuine interest from the organization. Teams don't invest that kind of time unless they see a potential fit. But this is where things get complicated, because drafting R. Mason Thomas would signal something very specific. It would mean the Seahawks are prioritizing replacing Boy Mafe's unique pass rush ability over building a more balanced, all-around edge defender. And that leads directly into the other major name that's been heavily linked to Seattle, a player who represents a very different approach, and could ultimately say even more about how Mike Macdonald wants to shape this defense moving forward. So when you look at everything, the roster situation, the contracts, the age of key players, and especially the coach's own words, it really feels like the Seahawks are zeroing in on the edge rusher position at pick 32. The only real question left is what type of edge rusher they believe will define the future of this defense. Do they go after that explosive, fast pass rush specialist to replace what they lost? Or do they lean toward a more complete player who can anchor the defense for years to come? What do you think the Seahawks should do with that 32nd pick? The other name that keeps coming up inside league circles and around Seattle's internal evaluations is Zion Young out of Missouri. And this is where the conversation really starts to split, depending on what direction the Seahawks want to take with this defense moving forward. Because unlike our Mason Thomas, who clearly brings that burst and immediate pressure off the edge, Young represents something much closer to the traditional Mike Macdonald prototype. When you watch Zion Young's tape and study what he did against SEC competition over the past couple of seasons, what stands out isn't just one elite trait, it's the balance. He's not necessarily the fastest edge rusher in the class, and he's not the most dominant pass rusher snap to snap, but he does everything at a consistently high level. He sets the edge well against the run, he maintains discipline, and he still manages to generate pressure and rack up sacks without being a liability in any phase of the game. And that matters a lot more than people realize in a Mike Macdonald system. This isn't a defense that wants to tip its hand based on personnel. If you have a player who can only rush the passer, offenses will adjust. If you have a player who can stay on the field for all 3 downs and execute multiple responsibilities, suddenly the defense becomes much harder to read, much harder to attack, and much more flexible overall. That's exactly where Young separates himself in this conversation. He's the kind of edge rusher who can step into a rotation immediately, learn from veterans like DeMarcus Lawrence, and gradually take on a bigger role without forcing the coaching staff to scheme around his weaknesses. He brings power, solid instincts, and the kind of physicality that allows him to hold up against the run while still contributing as a pass rusher. But there's also a ceiling question here, and it's something Seattle has to seriously weigh. While Mason Thomas might be more limited as a complete player right now, his explosiveness gives him a trait that simply can't be taught. That first step, that ability to win instantly off the edge, it's rare. Young, on the other hand, feels safer, more reliable, but maybe without that same game-breaking upside. So this decision at pick 32 could end up defining how aggressive or how balanced the Seahawks want to be defensively over the next few years. Are they trying to recreate that immediate disruption that Boye Mafe brought to the table, even if it comes with trade-offs in the run game? Or are they building a more complete, sustainable defensive front that can adapt to any situation without needing to substitute or adjust personnel? And don't forget, this isn't just about replacing one player. This is about preparing for what's coming. Uchenna Nwosu isn't getting younger. Derek Hall's future beyond his current deal isn't guaranteed. And even with DeMarcus Lawrence under contract, those retirement conversations are already floating around. And historically, once those discussions start, they don't just fade away. That means whoever Seattle selects here isn't just filling a role, they could very well be stepping into a starting position sooner rather than later. This is a foundational decision. There's also something else worth paying attention to, and that's how intentional the Seahawks have been throughout this process. Bringing in Mason Thomas for a top 30 visit shows clear interest, but the consistent buzz around Zion Young and how well he fits this scheme suggests that both players are firmly on Seattle's radar. This isn't a smokescreen. This feels like a front office narrowing in on 2 distinct paths and preparing to commit to one of them. And when you connect that back to Mike Macdonald's earlier comments about needing players who can create quick pressure, disrupt timing, and impact plays even without finishing sacks, it almost feels like both options are being justified in different ways. One through specialization, the other through versatility. That's what makes this so fascinating right now. The Seahawks aren't just deciding on a player, they're deciding on an identity. Because whichever name gets called at pick 32, it's going to tell us exactly how this coaching staff views the future of this defense. Fast and explosive with some risk, or balanced and reliable with long-term stability. Now I want to hear from you, because this is where the fan base really comes into play. If you're sitting in that war room, and both Mason Thomas and Zion Young are on the board, who are you taking to shape the future of the Seattle Seahawks defense? And of course, if you want to stay on top of everything happening with the Seahawks, make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and click on the video that's on your screen right now. Because all the latest updates and breaking news, you're only going to find it right here.